if there's a better case against God than what we saw at the Republican National Convention, I've never heard of it.
Hey, poor! Hey, poor! Hey, poor! You don't have to be poor anymore! Jesus is here!
The loudspeaker spoke up and said, Christianity is stupid.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is busy demanding attention from me. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cat. Get over it. And this is a special news show episode, as this time I'm joined by America Darling Curl, and we're going to be covering a whole bunch of stuff. Say hello, America.
Hey, guys.
A couple of things I need to go over before we get to the news, before I forget. The first is I'm now up to 3 Patreon supporters, which is fantastic. None of you, only one of you has sent me an email, so I don't know if I can refer to any of you by name, so I'm not going to name you on this episode other than Peg, who is one of the contributors, because the way Patreon has their thing set up, it's a little confusing, and I kind of screwed up, so I need to make some adjustments to how the donations or the contributions are done, and I will do that well after I post this episode, so those of you who want to make a change to how you're doing it, and as a result of this, can do it without getting dinged, because Patreon, they say, oh, well, we'll charge you, they say you can make your contributions monthly or on a per item basis, but the way they word it when you're setting it up, it looks like you're setting it up so that the contributions are either on a monthly basis or they're when you first set up your account. And even though it says, your contributions are, when you get to contributing on a per episode basis, you're actually not billed on each episode. They bill you once a month. So with all that, it kind of threw me off. So I will make an adjustment. And like I said, I'll do that well after this episode goes up. So those of you who want to make a change can make a change without being worried about being dinged too much at one time. At least in theory. And I will give the folks at Patreon credit. They have made it a lot less confusing to set up an account now than what it was. That's why I haven't done it before now, because it was like 3 pages of material you had to read before you actually understood what all you were doing, and now they've vastly simplified it. The other bit of news I have is that I talked to my mother the other day. She's doing much better. She's home. I don't know if I mentioned that last time or not, but she's home. She's got friends looking after her, and from the way she sounded on the phone, her mental acuity is back to where it should be, because when I talked to her in the hospital, she sounded really bad the first time I called her. And she did somehow the doctor managed to convince Medicare to pay for her antibiotics. So instead of it being $13,000 a month for the antibiotics, it's only going to be $200 a month, which is still pretty pricey when you're on Social Security, but it's certainly a lot more affordable than $13,000. Of course, last I heard, she hadn't gotten the bills from the hospital yet, which those will start trickling in over the next 6 months probably, or even longer. Anything else? I think that's it. You got anything you want to say?
No. I just am super happy to be here, and I'm sorry about your mom, Tucker.
Thank you. She just had, a month or so ago, she had her knee replaced, and that was risky, her being in her 80s, and then her coming down with C. diff afterwards was pretty bad, but I know my aunt was staying with her. I don't know if my aunt still is or not, but by this point, Mom should be well enough that she's on her own, and if not, a couple of her neighbors know her. You know, they're friends she's known for decades, so they'll no doubt be popping by all the time.
That's good.
Now here's a brief message from my friend Jeannie.
Hi, I'm Jeannie, and here's a thought. $7,000 for a funeral. Let that sink in. $7,000. Really? Holy fuck. No. I mean, I'll go to the service because he was a good guy, and because his survivor is a wreck, and because he had 2 daughters, and because he had 2 grandbabies. And yeah, I'll throw into the GoFundMe to make that happen for the family because it's important to them. But fucking hell, really? There's better ways to spend my money. Never, ever, ever let me be in that situation. Just put me in the ground, please.
This is a fantasy business, Reverend. You can have any truth you want.
And so can you. Isn't that why you're here?
Isn't that why you are?
Holy Land Experience sells assets. Harley motorcycle amid financial trouble. So in Orlando, Florida, the Holy Land Experience is having financial difficulties. The Christian-themed attraction is still open, but it's selling off of some of its high-end assets, including a Harley motorcycle, which is horrendous. I've seen the photos. The attraction is tax exempt because it claims it runs a ministry. So that's saving them about $400,000 in annual property taxes. But even with that, they have just barely made it into the black last year. Despite all these losses, employee salaries and benefits went up by more than $1 million over 3 years, even though they have fewer employees and fewer patrons to the park. The CEO is making $400,000. His wife is making $364,000 and is acting president. And their son, Paul Jr., I'm sorry, the CEO's name is Paul Crouch. His wife is Jan. And then their son, Paul Jr., he is making $256,000. So pretty cushy salaries for people who are running an organization that is slowly going down the drain.
Yeah, and that's old information as to who is running it, because Paul and Jan are both dead now.
Oh, okay.
He died a couple of years ago, and she died last year or the year before. He died a couple of years before she did. And
oh, you're right. I'm sorry. It does, in a very weird way, it says they died and then lists their salaries.
Right. That may be the last bit of information they could get.
Gotcha.
As far as that, because ministries can hide a lot of that crap because they're not subject to the same rules and regulations as ordinary nonprofits are.
Right. It says the Trinity Broadcast Network, which is also owned by the Crouches, owns about 20 homes from California to Texas to Tennessee and in Florida, and several of them are $2 million homes in Windermere, which I assume is a very fancy gated community.
I would.
I've never heard of it, so I'm obviously not fancy enough.
Yeah.
And now I want to start a church.
Hey, well, you know, the beauty of owning a church is you can get your house paid for by the church, and it's all tax-free.
And I would run such a good church. I wouldn't do the babysitting, but we would have free childcare. There would be a community garden. There would be puppies and kittens running around. And I would want to live in a modest 800 square foot, 2-bedroom home. That's all I want. I want enough room for my sewing. That's fine. I'm starting a church, Tucker.
Sounds like a plan. This Holy Land is... They've always had trouble getting tourists in there to visit it, from what I understand. If you watch Bill Maher's Religulous, when he goes there, you can see that there's not a lot of people in the place visiting. They have their big... Like, their big event is a reenactment of the crucifixion.
Oh, good Lord.
You can see that, the stands they built are not very full. So it's pretty bad, and...
They should do gladiator fights. I would go see that.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. Let's see here. This next story comes from ncronline.org. Criminal charges dropped against Twin Cities Archdiocese after it admits wrongdoing in abuse case. Criminal charges against the St. Paul, Minneapolis Archdiocese were dropped Wednesday after it agreed to a revision of its civil settlement that added direct and public admission of wrongdoing for its role in sexual abuse of 3 minors by a former priest. Now, this just kills me. I don't understand why they would drop this. Because this is a civil... Because they're dropping criminal charges based on what the church agreed to do in a civil case. I don't understand why they would do that. Why the prosecutor would agree to that.
And I think it's because I don't realize I do my best to stay out of jail. What is the main difference between a civil settlement and criminal? Can you not go to jail? I mean, there's obviously a fine here.
Right. Well, a civil settlement would be if you or I were to sue somebody in court, and and then they agreed to pay. They lost the case, or they said, "Look, we're not going to fight it. We'll just pay you money if that's all you want."
Okay.
So it's not. It's outside the legal channels. So I could sue you, for example, like, let's say, you had a tree on your property and it fell onto my yard and damaged some of my property. There's no way you would go to jail for that. Well, okay, you're black, so you could go to jail for anything, but you get my point.
Right.
And so, but I could sue you over that and you would have to pay me. But it would be like you breaking into my house, me suing you over it, and the police saying, well, America, if you admit to breaking into his house, we'll drop the prosecution charges against you. Since
gotcha.
You've agreed to pay him for this. And I don't know. I mean, this is in Minnesota. I don't know if it was either in Minnesota or Wisconsin, but one of the archdioceses, how they wound up subject to, this kind of lawsuit and stuff in criminal prosecution was because their own lawyer turned them in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like, how corrupt do you have to be for your own lawyer to rat you out?
What? Right. Wow.
So, but that
makes me feel better about lawyers. Okay. Hashtag not all lawyers.
Yeah, but this, I just don't understand this as to why, I can't fathom why the prosecutor would agree to this unless he thought he had a weak case.
They did talk about, later on in the article, not trying to criminally prosecute some other people because they just didn't have enough evidence, so they had to stay with civil.
Yeah. I mean, that's not too uncommon in these kinds of in molestation cases, because a lot of it comes down to simply he said, she said, or he said type stuff. Right. But still the times when they've been criminally prosecuted, it has, there have been successful criminal prosecutions priests who molest people, so I'm just at a loss.
And it's not like we don't have enough jail space.
Yeah. And, I mean, unless it's, stipulated somewhere in the agreement, then, the accused priests may not have to register as sex offenders. So...
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's problematic as well.
All right. I didn't... Okay.
Yeah, that's just a little odd.
And they also talked about, and I may have read wrong, they had several other allegations. Here we go. The admission was confirmed during the first progressive report for the settlement agreement. In court Wednesday morning, Hebda reported that the Archdiocese has received 3 allegations of sexual abuse by a priest in the past 6 months. I don't know. And then it says that they remove the priest, and then the public is notified. But that is really quite terrifying. I would not be going to church in this neighborhood or in these archdiocese churches. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, they've got, I mean, there's some good things that they're planning to do, according to the article. Like, one of the things they're going to do is allow the Ramsey County Attorney to appoint a member of the 12-person Archdiocesan Ministerial Review Board, with Choi selecting Patty Wetterling, a child safety advocate and past chair of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So they've got, somebody who's definitely going to be a strong advocate for protecting the kids, but still, right. It just doesn't. There's still parts of this that just don't pass the smell test. It's one of those things that you don't really know, because there's not, you're not familiar with all the details. And that would take ages to figure out.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
Asps. Very dangerous. You go first.
I love the Daily Mail so much. I've got to widen this window to be able to read the headline.
I know.
Oh, goodness.
But that was the one site I could find that had the most information on everything, so that's what I went with, rather than, something more reputable.
Oh, no, it's fine. I love this place. Okay. And now we go to the Daily Mail. The Diary of a Pyramid Builder. I love that. Oldest papyrus in existence details where Egyptian workers shifted stones and even how many sheep they ate, and could reveal the secrets of the Great Pyramid of Giza. That was just the headline, which is why I love the Daily Mail. Because I love to read headlines and then just skim the article and not get to any of the good bits. So, items from the 4th dynasty of King, I'm going to butcher his name, Khufu, also known as... Oh, do you know it?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Khufu.
Okay, King Khufu, also known as
Cheops.
Thank you, Cheops. Hopefully no mummy shows up and butchers me in my sleep for insulting him. For whom the Great Pyramid of Giza was built as a tomb. These reveals the daily lives of port workers who transported huge limestone blocks to Cairo, and it shows the distribution of food portions for workers, including one showing the number of sheep brought in. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo on Thursday began putting on display the country's oldest papyruses, which date back 4,500 years, detailing the daily life of the pyramid builders. Ben Carson is not going to like this story. And a lot of this is just photos, and when you look at them, they're absolutely beautiful, and I'm amazed that something lasted 4,500 years. Egypt's antiquities minister told reporters as the exhibition was unveiled that the papyruses were discovered in 2013 by an Egyptian French mission led inside caves on a local port. The ancient port is located 74 miles or 119 kilometers from the city of Suez. Museum chief said the papyruses depict the daily routine of the workers who also transferred building materials from the Red Sea port to Giza. One document was a diary by government officials with statistics and administrative details of his work. This is really exciting. I'm constantly amazed that we're able to find things from thousands of years ago. One of the papyruses belonged to a senior employee named Mar. I love that they know his name, who played a role in the building of the pyramid, and it covered a period of 3 months of his job, providing information about his duties, including transporting rocks through the River Nile and its canals. Other papyruses showed the distribution of food portions for workers, including one showing in clear Egyptian hieroglyphics the number of sheep brought in. So, now that we know the pyramids were built by people paid, how are the Christians going to react with the Jews and the slaves and the building of the pyramids? And Carson, I mean, there's nothing about grain in here.
I know. It's one of those things, you just scratch the surface slightly and pretty soon the whole story of Moses in Egypt falls apart.
And then what do you... I always wonder, because I don't know anybody, let's say, that maybe is a very middle of the road, like Christian. They're a kind of strong believer. And I've never met anybody that's that kind of person and then becomes an atheist. But I always wonder what it would take, what sort of little block could you remove from their Jenga tower that would make this fall to pieces? Could they read this and say, okay, well, if this isn't true, what else isn't true?
Yeah. I mean, I know for me, what caused me to give up on religion was I was sitting in church one day and I was like, just wondering if anybody actually really believed the stuff that we were being preached about. And they were reading, that particular day, they were reading from the Sermon on the Mount. And they got to the part where Jesus condemns divorce and says that, if you look at a woman with lust in your eye, you've committed adultery. And I was like, well, that just proves that this is bullshit because, A, I know people who are way better off now that they've been divorced than they would be if they stayed with their spouse.
Right.
And B, if you don't look at somebody and get it that's attractive and be aroused by it, then we're not going to be a species which reproduces.
Right.
So whoever wrote this didn't understand, human social interactions and basic biology. And I was raised Lutheran, and we were perfectly fine with divorce. So obviously, if we're not going to buy what Jesus himself said, because, the Sermon on the Mount comes out from the mouth of Jesus. It's not like Paul or one of the apostles saying something. It's actually the voice of God. If we're going to ignore what he says, then obviously nobody really buys it. They just pretend to.
Right. I guess they just want you to look at another person and judge them as a human being first before you get an erection. I don't know.
Well, there's supposedly some nuance about it. The way I've heard it explained, and it still doesn't make any sense, is that the law is given more restrictive than what is expected of you, so that you can, it's like, say there's a danger zone around an object, and that danger zone is 10 miles. Well, if you stay back 50 miles, then you're really safe. And that's what Jesus is supposedly doing with his statement, is not telling you to stay back 10 miles, but stay back 50 miles. And but it's still, it sets people up in such a way that, because we're going to be aroused in some manner or another by people we find attractive.
Right.
We're wired up to do that. That's how a species propagates itself. And so to tell people, well, no, you can't find somebody attractive if they're not your spouse, that's just crazy. it sets people up to have all kinds of emotional problems, which, of course, then the church says they can solve by having you pray.
Like praying to Jesus.
Yeah, and giving them lots of money.
I made a new friend recently who grew up in what seems like a cult in his description of it. And he is currently speaking to someone about that. He's got professional help. And I was lucky enough, the Mormons and the Catholics that raised me, they were strict, but it wasn't probably as bad as it could have been. And I cannot imagine what it must be like to have a religious upbringing so traumatizing as the one that he seeed to have had. Goodness.
Yeah. It's
now that we're on this tangent.
No, that's fine. I know people who, they've been, they were raised by some really whacked out religious type, whether, they were mainstream Christian or other, and even if they've left that denomination but still are a Christian, they have problems that they have to deal with because of the, insanity they were raised with.
Right.
This comes from the WashingtonPost.com. Caribbean cave art sheds surprising new light on ancient religious collision. Let's see here. The picturesque island of Mona sits isolated between the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico in the Caribbean Sea. It has no human settlements and is devoid of human life except for Puerto Rican wildlife managers, conservationists, and the odd researchers. But beneath the island, cutting through the limestone like the bacterial bubbles in Swiss cheese, are a network of caves. And tucked away within those caverns hide the remnants of a rich cultural history, one more complex than grade school stories of Christopher Columbus's New World conquest would have it. As scientists from the Puerto Rico and the United Kingdom recently announced, Mona is the site of a particular religious collusion. Carved into the limestone rock are religious motifs, where both the spiritual beliefs of the native islanders and Christianity as practiced by 16th century Spaniards seem to coexist. Now, there was, and I don't know who it is, the oatmeal every year on Columbus Day makes a big deal out of a guy who showed up after Columbus who actually was a decent overseer of some type. He, rather than, persecuting the natives, killing them, and enslaving them, he worked to treat them humanely and coexist with them. And I'm wondering if this isn't because of him or, somebody connected with him. Because, we all know the pretty bloody history of the Spanish conquest of the Americas.
Right.
Given where the markings were found, as National Geographic noted, the scientists argue that the islanders would have had to guide the Europeans about 160 feet in the dark, and the location of the Christian markings, not obscuring the older artwork, but at its side, indicates the colonists had respect for the native population.
I like that.
Yeah.
I read that part, and that seemed really out of character with how I thought Christian ministries would have treated native populations all along.
Right. That's more along the lines of like what the Greeks and the Romans would do when they encountered another society, where, they would look at that other society's gods and goddesses and say, oh, well, you call this god, such and such. We call him Zeus.
Right.
Even though they weren't identical, but because the stories about them were fairly similar in some respects, they would say, oh yeah, that's actually our God by this name. And the Catholics did that sometimes. They'd say, oh, well, this, your goddess is actually the Virgin Mary. That's who, she's not a goddess, she's the Virgin Mary. Or they'd say it was Saint so-and-so.
But you blinded me with silence. She blinded me with silence.
Ooh, making a multi-use stiff carbon foam using bread. This was so exciting to read. Okay. To all the science nerds, I apologize in advance if I mispronounce something. You will get over that. So, making a multi-use stiff carbon foam using bread. Sturdy, lightweight carbon foam has many structural and insulating applications in aerospace engineering, energy storage, and temperature maintenance. Current methods to create this material run into difficulties when trying to make the product strong, lightweight, environmentally friendly, and low cost. Now, a group report in ACS, Applied Materials and Interfaces, a method to produce such a carbon foam by using super toasted bread. Good, my cooking skills will come into handy. Carbon foams have a 3D network that allows them to be lightweight, tolerant of high temperatures, and adjustable in their thermal and electrical properties. Many different materials, such as graphene sheets, 2D layers of carbon atoms, and biomass, such as banana peels, can be used to make these foams, but they're not very stable, are costly, or have inner structures that cannot be adjusted. So, what researchers found is using a bread recipe as a guide, by mixing flour, yeast, water, and then kneading and baking the dough in a specific manner, the researchers can then use a laboratory tube furnace under argon gas conditions to carbonize the product into a hard foam. That's super cool. And importantly, this cheap, easy to make foam's inner pore structure can be tuned by changing the amount of yeast and water, which allows it to be used for a variety of different applications. This is the coolest thing ever. I took a couple classes of nanotechnology in college, and I'm constantly amazed by what we can do. Now we're making carbon foam out of bread.
Yeah, well, it's not in this article, and I'll have to do some work later on if I can ever remember. I want to find out exactly how good the insulation value of this is. Because... Ooh. If it is the best insulation we know of outside of vacuum wall, putting something in a Dewar flask, which is insulated by vacuum, is an aerogel, and those are they're starting to get the cost down, but its stuff is still really expensive. If this is cheaper vastly cheaper to make, which it should be, than an aerogel, and has almost the same insulating properties as an aerogel, then it's got huge benefits. Because, I mean, to give you an idea how good the aerogels are, that's what they use to insulate the rovers on Mars to keep the electronics from freezing at night.
Ah, okay.
So, if this stuff is almost that good, and, I mean, okay, the bread ingredients are going to be nothing. The furnace with the argon gas, that's a little pricier, but not that much pricier.
Right.
That's. I have a feeling somebody could with the right skills, could whip one of those things up fairly easy, since similar applications are used in metalworking. So, I mean, if this stuff is dirt cheap and is almost as good as aerogels, then people could economically afford to replace the insulation in their house with this stuff. So
that would be amazing. That would be something cool to see in homes later on. Just know your walls are filled with burnt bread.
Yeah. Well, and it has, and most people don't realize this, but there's insulation in their cars.
Oh, yeah.
And if this stuff is lighter than regular insulation, then putting it in your car will improve your gas mileage.
That is a very good point.
I mean, it won't be a dramatic improvement, but I know from dealing with the car industry that they look to shave ounces off of cars just to make sure they hit their fuel economy standards. So if the stuff is lighter than the standard stuff, then that'll save them some weight. Or and the other thing is if they can use thinner amounts, then you have more space inside the car.
I'm super excited about this.
Yeah.
I'm going to follow this story and see what happens.
From NOLA.com, June sets global temperature record, extends world hot streak. This June has joined every month of this year so far in setting an all-time monthly record for global temperatures, according to two separate federal science agencies. And if Trump gets into office, we can expect those federal agencies to be shut down or barred from doing this kind of research. Though the globe was not as extremely warm last month as it was earlier in the year. Much warmer than average conditions dominated across much of the globe's surface, resulting in the highest temperature for June since global temperature records began in 1880, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And I have to say, last month we cracked triple-digit temperatures in June for the first time since I've lived here almost 30 years now.
Wow. Seriously?
Seriously. Normally we don't get... We don't start hitting the high 90s until about this time of year. And August and the beginning of September are usually our worst months when it comes to heat. And we cracked triple digits in June when we're usually normally in the upper 80s. And the only time I can remember it being in the triple digits for more than like a day was 4 years ago when we had 9 straight days where it was over 100, and that was about this time of year or a little later. But the heat index this month, almost every day, has been in the triple digits, even if the temperature hasn't crossed 100. Right.
Here in Tucson, we had record-setting temperatures. We hit 115 and 116, I believe, on a Saturday-Sunday weekend. And unfortunately, people have come from all over the world to go hiking in summer, and I believe 3 German tourists died. They found one guy, or 2 may have died, and the third one survived. But a small party of people went hiking, and some of them did not make it out, which happens. And I'm very happy and very privileged to have AC at both work and home and own a car, because our bus stops here, almost all of them are not covered.
Oh, God. None of the ones I use are covered.
Yeah. And so I'm in Tucson, which is at a higher elevation, and has much more greenery, and it's a smaller city than Phoenix. But Phoenix is just a big, sprawling metropolis. And they have bulldozed every green plant that they found and just paved over it with asphalt. So they hit like 118.
I saw somebody on Facebook posted a photo. Their car, they were in Phoenix and their car was reading like 125.
Oh yeah, that's not surprising at all. The sun will go down. It'll be 2:00 in the morning and you're still 105, especially in the summer, because it just holds heat and there's nothing to cool you off. I don't understand how people live in that city, but they do. The crazies. So,
well, I know that in the Grand Canyon they have a real problem because the air is so dry. People don't realize they're sweating, because as soon as the sweat comes onto their skin, it evaporates, and they end up getting down to the bottom and are dehydrated and have to be airlifted out.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure why people go hiking really at all in the summer. I get that you want to get up super early, but even now it's 80 degrees at our lowest temperature. I just can't imagine why people go hiking in the summer, and they do, and somebody dies every year, and I just don't get it.
And it's only getting warmer, which is frightening. And there's one of the things that bothers, well, not bothers me, concerns me, is that there's what's known as the rain belt, and that's basically in the northern and southern hemispheres. There's on the map, if you look, there's like really green sections, and that's because those areas of the world get lots and lots of rain. And as the Earth is getting hotter, those rain belts are being pushed away from where they normally are. They're moving more towards the poles, and the equator is getting hotter and hotter and drier, and there are large numbers of people who live in that part of the world, and most of them are poor, so they can't move.
From the Atlantic, how a guy from a Montana trailer park overturned 150 years of biology. In 1995, Toby Sprilby, if you would have told Toby Sprilby that he'd eventually overthrow a scientific idea that's been the stuff of textbooks for 150 years, he would have laughed at you. Back then, his life seemed constrained to a very different path. He was raised in a Montana trailer park and homeschooled by what he now describes as a fundamentalist cult. As a young age, he fell in love with science, but had no way of feeding that love. He longed to break away from his roots and get a proper education. Because at 19, he was able to get a job at a local forestry service, and within a few years, he'd earned enough to leave home. Unfortunately, because he didn't have anything to prove American grades, he looked to Europe, and because he spoke German from a family background, he was admitted to the University of Göttingen, where he did his undergraduate and postgraduate work. And he studied lichens. Coming back to the States, well, to give some background information, in 1868, a Swiss botanist named Simon, Schwenderner, but this botanist believed that the that the lichen had enslaved the algae. But other scientists later discovered that they cooperated to provide minerals and water and shelter for the other. And two Germans, Albert Frank and Anton de Berry, provided the perfect word, symbiosis, from the Greek of together and living. And now we come back to our superstar. Since then, Sprybill has discovered that it was thought that two organisms lived together, so fungus and an algae, but he is discovering three organisms together. One is yellow because it makes a strong volcanic acid. The other lacks this toxin and is dark brown. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it said there were three.
Yeah, there are three. It's
right.
It's not terribly clear. This is more of a piece about personality than it is a science article, but it was the best one I could find. And living in a trailer park, I love the headlines. So, but what it is it's one fungus and two different kinds of algae, and depending on which algae is dominant, determines certain characteristics of the lichen.
Okay, thank you, because I didn't.
Yeah,
I will admit this one was a little.
Yeah, it's
difficult for me to get.
Yeah, it's a little hard to understand. But what's not talked about this, I mean, it's interesting, because we've got a guy who grew up in some kind of whacked out religious cult, but managed to escape and make a scientific breakthrough. So there's hope for other people being raised in whacked out cults. But lichens are incredibly, they're like the tardigrades or water bears of the plant world. They're very hard to kill.
Okay.
And one of the things that they've talked about doing with lichens is using them as part of environmental cleanups.
Oh.
As well as they think that they could be used for terraforming, places like Mars or Venus.
Okay, so I didn't know that. I did, I feel like I'd heard about it, but I didn't realize they were that hardy.
Yeah, they're really tough to kill. I think that Well, I know that that basically any place on the planet that is, above water, you can find them, just about. There may be an exception at the poles, but I think they even find them in Antarctica.
Wow.
So, and, but, with it being, with them thinking that, well, it can only be 2 organisms living together, and discovering now that it can be 3, that offers a better chance for us to adapt them to do things that we need, like cleaning up an environmental, waste site or something like that.
Right, because it later on talks about they're not sure if one of the algae is eating it or manufacturing or unlocking the ability for it to make it in the other funguses, and so they want to see how this can translate into other areas, specifically medical purposes.
Right, because one of the big problems we have with, apparently we've discovered a lot of compounds, like produced by microorganisms that would be perfect for antibiotics, but we can't figure out how to grow them in the lab so that we could mass produce them.
Right.
This would potentially offer us a way to do that, as well as some of the other things.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, and I know that they've also talked about using plants, lichens, for detection of things like landmines. Because you would, scatter the spores around, and then if they grew on an area, that would mean there was a landmine directly under them.
Ah.
Because apparently the landmines don't fully seal up, so some of the explosives, etc., leach out into the soil.
That's not scary at all.
No.
Oh, fellow members of the Roman Senate, hear me. Shall we continue to build palace after palace for the rich, or shall we aspire to a more noble purpose and build decent housing for the poor? How does the Senate vote? Fuck the poor! Good.
This comes from Mike.com, and as you said, this is probably your favorite story. Republican Convention 2016 attendees are searching for hot gay sex on Craigslist. Which,
oh, goodness.
is not too surprising, considering how many Republicans have been caught in gay sex scandals. Let's see here, the article says, the acronym RNC technically refers to the Republican National Convention taking place in Cleveland, Ohio this week, but if the city's current influx of RNC-themed casual encounters, Craigslist advertisements is any indication, it could just as well stand for like raunchy nutcock or something. The Daily Dot reports that the classified site has become a veritable treasure trove of non-safe-for-work hookup ads in recent days. I just, and yet they have a platform that is hostile to gays, transgenders, and yet there they are in Cleveland looking for some hot gay sex.
Pornhub publishes its viewing stats once or twice a year, and then every time the Republicans do something that makes them assholes. And in the places where racism and homophobia are quite prevalent, so all of the South, ebony, or I think it's ebony/black is the category, and then lesbian, and especially black lesbians, and then gay are the big categories always in the South. Every time Pornhub publishes something, the places that hates non-white people and gays are the places where they masturbate to non-white people and gays.
Well, I know I've seen a lot of swinger ads that, they're looking for a black man.
Yes.
And they're always worded in a rather derogatory way.
Yes.
And I mean, I'm just kind of stunned that any black guy would actually respond to these ads because, you know, it's like, my wife's been bad, she needs to be punished, so I want her to take a giant black cock. Yeah, literally, that's what, you know, that's the kinds of ads I've seen, and it's, you know, it's not like, hey, we want to try something different, and, you know.
Right. Your penis sleeping with you is a punishment to my wife. Oh, no, so I'm very active in the kink community, and the number of times I will have someone drop the N-bomb in a first message to me, at this point, I can't count. It happens on the regular. As if it is somehow complimentary to refer to me as a racial slur.
Are they at least saying, well, you seem like a nice one? Or
it's, I mean, right, the rest of it is, you're a very pretty N-word.
Oh,
or,
well.
I'm like, thanks. I had a guy, I went to a singles thing with a friend, and I went just as chaperone. And this guy walks up to me, sits down, looks me dead in the eye, and he says, "You're a very beautiful colored girl, and I would like to take you out on a date." And I said, "Well, thank you very much, sir. But unfortunately, I am seeing someone. Thank you." This does not surprise me at all. I have... Perhaps one of my best friends is gay, and I wanted him to go to the Trump convention with me because I just wanted to see if we could, you know, get some dudes to hit on him during the Trump rally. Because it doesn't surprise me that these people that have to hide their lusts have gathered in one place under one party and are using tags like RNC bitch boy or beefy hairy RNC visitor. So...
Yeah, and that took some massive ovaries on your part to go to the Trump rally. I commend you for that. I wouldn't have done it. And
I went and I wore a t-shirt that said atheist on it. So I was really asking to get beat up. And I didn't.
Yeah, and I mean, I fit the profile of a Trump supporter, so I would be able to blend in really well, but...
Yeah, I truly believed that they weren't going to let me in, and I had friends who were protesting, and I wouldn't speak to them. They are loudly calling my name, although it's America, so no one knows it's actually my name, but I am sweating bullets. And one friend walked up to me and she's like, "I see you," and I was like, "Ma'am, I don't know you. Please don't talk to me." Because I didn't think they were going to let me in if they thought I was protesting. So... It would be... Did you see the fight between Alex Jones and the Young Turks, the gentleman from the Young Turks?
No, I missed that. I haven't.
You should look it up on YouTube. I'm just kind of surprised considering all of the various liberal media outlets, and there's a YouTube star who is a gay, very flamboyant gay man who went, and I'm just kind of surprised there was not more hubbub than this one little altercation.
Yeah. Well, I have a feeling that there probably was, but you know, it was they managed to keep a lot of it away from the public,
right?
You know, so it didn't get too much attention get paid to it.
Okay, I lied. This may be my absolute favorite story. The RNC Craigslist is number 2. Representative Steve King can't recall non-white people contributing to civilization. At least more than, you know, white people. So his exact quote is, and he said this on television in a wider discussion about racial politics and things. But he says, "I'd ask you to go back through history and figure out, where are these contributions that have been made by these other categories of people that you're talking about? Where did any other subgroup of people contribute more to civilization?" And that was perhaps one of the first things that I heard about the RNC on a Monday morning. So what does he think the rest of the world did? And how many white people does he think exist in this world. Let's go back quite a bit, but I mean, white people tend to come from Europe. That's just through climate. That's where you're getting pale skin from. So what does he think the rest of the world did before white people showed up?
And he's probably one of these people. I know it was really common where I grew up, and I mean, I grew up late 60s, early 70s, so things were a wee bit different back then in the dark ages. But, like, when I was a kid, one of the biggest things was Polish jokes.
Yes.
And, technically Poles are white people. I mean, when I say technically, the reason for that is because, guys like David Duke think that white people are only those who come from England or Germany. Everybody else is some kind of subhuman group. But, even with guys like this, because he's from Iowa. So, civilization sort of stops there. He's probably derogatory against other white Europeans. And, I mean, civilization started in the Mideast, almost certainly. If it, those people would, what their exact ethnic makeup isn't entirely certain. I mean, they certainly would have been Semitic peoples, the ancestors of modern Arabs and Jews, but there was probably some Africans in there, since that area would have been, was a mixing pot.
Right.
And, I mean, Egypt, after, like, and a few other cities grew up in the Mideast, and then Egypt was, like, the largest civilization for the longest time, and at that point in time, it was almost certain that the residents of Egypt were overwhelmingly black.
Right. And I'm not sure. I don't understand. I mean, I don't understand how you could make such a horrible statement, but I don't understand at what time period. It's like the Make America Great Again.
Yeah.
You've got to be talking about a very specific period in time to make such a statement.
Yeah. Well, and even if you're just talking about American history, look how much minorities of one stripe or another have contributed to American culture. I mean,
yes. Rock and roll,
jazz, blues, all, big, huge influences on American society. All came out of the African American community. In fact, ragtime, another one. In fact, I guarantee you, most people don't know that Scott Joplin was black.
Probably not.
But everybody knows his music. Well, everybody of my generation and a little older, because it was used.
All the cool kids know his.
Well, it was used heavily in the movie The Sting, which was immensely popular when it came out.
Yeah, I've not seen that one. I'll have to look it up.
It's Paul Newman and Robert Redford. It's a con game that they run. It's about a bunch of con games that they run during Prohibition, and the soundtrack is all, ragtime or jazz.
Ooh,
yeah,
I will like that.
Well, and if you think Paul Newman and Robert Redford are handsome,
yes, that. It will not hurt to have some eye candy in that movie.
Yeah. But I mean, literature, the Beats, Kerouac, Burroughs, all those guys, I mean, they were white, but they were heavily influenced by the jazz scene at that time.
Right. And they're black inventors and scientists, authors and artists, and
right.
I just don't understand what he means. Where did any other subgroup of people contribute more to civilization? We have my hospital, one of the largest research populations are Middle Eastern women right now. These scientists are doing amazing things for cancer research. I don't understand what he means by where did any other subgroup of people contribute more to civilization?
Yeah. Well, and
Because he's racist.
yeah. Yeah.
There is no other understanding.
Okay, from the Washington Post, North Miami police shoot black man who said his hands were raised while he tried to help an autistic patient. And there's fucking video of it, and the guy's hands were upraised in the video. Authorities said Thursday that they were investigating a shooting earlier this week in which a police officer shot a man who said his hands were empty and raised at the time. And the cop was not shooting at that guy. He was shooting at the autistic patient. And missed. He fired 3 shots and only one of them hit anything.
So that's even worse.
Yeah.
He could have put 3 bullets into somebody. And there is a neighbor or a store owner, a Mr. Michaels, who says that he tried to warn officers. He had binoculars and tried to tell, Thomas Matthews, 73, property manager of a corner food store on the street where Kinsey was shot, said he watched the incident unfold through a pair of binoculars. Matthews told a female officer that all he could see in the boy's hand was a toy truck and that it was not a gun. And the female officer just said, "Get back." So someone even tried to warn them that he doesn't have a gun in his hands, and they didn't listen.
And it was only one officer who shot, so the other 2 must have realized that maybe there's, we don't need to do this.
Right.
But somebody, and they deliberately phrased it inappropriately, said, when your target is the retard and not the black guy, that's not a better excuse.
Oh God, that's horrible, and I totally get it.
Yeah, I mean, because autism and mental handicaps are entirely different things. But, and, I mean, this illustrates that cops, can be too trigger happy.
Oh, definitely.
And the sad thing is if the guy who got shot had been white, nobody would have heard about this.
No, not at all.
And I mean, you had the training seems to be to show up and immediately be aggressive in a situation rather than showing up and assessing the situation before you decide to be aggressive, if that's the necessary case. And this is in a way like Tamir Rice. They just rolled up and shot that poor kid.
Yes, car hadn't stopped. The young autistic man, and I'm sorry, I feel horrible for just calling him the young autistic man, but his name is in here and I just can't remember it. His sister wrote a really sad Facebook post, and apparently the young boy just kept saying, "Oh no, blood, oh no," and was terrified and frightened by that, and they hospitalized him, and he had a breakdown, and he's now in a more high security facility because the situation was so traumatic for him.
Yeah, well, some people in that situation, like the autistic kid, they bond with their caretaker. And if they become separated from their caretaker, it's very traumatic for them. And they have, they can have really bad problems because of, regardless of the reason why they're separated from their caretaker. I had a teacher in high school who he did that for a while because he was going to school for I don't know if it was psychology or therapy, but he was going to school for something, and as part of his course he had to work in some kind of adult care facility where they dealt with autistic individuals. And they had one of his patients was somebody who was nonverbal most of the time, and he managed to get the guy to be verbal.
Wow.
And he was doing a lot of work, he was making a lot of progress with the guy, and then on a day that he was supposed to be there, he had to do something related to school. He couldn't be there, and he had explained carefully to the guy, says, I can't be here tomorrow. I'm sorry. I have to do this, on and on and on. Made sure that the guy understood it. And he said, he went and did his thing, and he came back, and the guy had regressed back to where he was when my teacher started working with him.
Oh my God. Wow.
Because he couldn't handle being separated from, he couldn't handle the disruption of his routine. And my teacher said, he had been told that was a possibility, but he thought, well, it won't happen,
Right, not in a day.
And, it really bothered him. And he said that the doctors he was working with said, if this bothers you, you don't need to be in this line of work. And he said it really bothered him. He was bawling and crying over it because all that hard work had been for nothing, basically.
Wow.
So, they may have really screwed up this kid, and, and of course, that the guy that got shot, he's going to have to deal with that, with recovering from the bullet wounds for a while, and he may have problems for the rest of his life, depending on where he was hit.
Right. And there is not a lot of money in therapeutic care for autistic individuals. So he may not have... if this man needs to be up and walking all the time, he's just been shot in the leg. How likely is he to be able to go immediately back to work after this situation? And goodness knows, if the cops shoot me while I'm laying down on the ground, I couldn't ever be in the presence of the police officer again after that.
Yeah. that's a good way to give somebody PTSD.
I would never not think that a cop was going to shoot me. No matter, he's on the ground, hands in the air.
Yeah. And you can see that clearly in the video. That the guy's on the ground, his hands are in the air,
And he's telling his patient to lie down. Just please be careful and lie down. Poor kid doesn't get it.
And, it's stuff like this that makes me want to go to Canada. Because they have their own problems, but I don't think they're shooting people regularly like this.
Right. I am a gun owner, and I hate when I hear other gun owners say, oh, if I was in X situation that I would, start shooting or try and save the day. And I'm like, look, I have a hard enough time worrying about a police officer shooting the bad guy and me maybe getting shot in that situation. I don't also need the bad guy and you to be shooting with the cops at the same time. And then I could die by 3 separate people because all of you suck at this.
Yeah, well, do you listen to Cognitive Dissonance, the podcast?
Yes.
I assume you heard their special where they talked about going through the concealed carry class and the idiots that were in that class.
Yes, and that doesn't surprise me. I was not surprised in the least.
Yeah. And, I know at when Gabby Giffords was shot by that lunatic, that there was a guy there who had a concealed weapon on him legally, and he didn't use it because he worried about people not knowing that he was actually the good guy.
Right. In that madness, you have no idea.
Yeah.
And here in Arizona, you can both concealed and open carry without a permit. I'm not actually sure why people get the concealed carry. I think it's if you want to take it out of state, and states may have reciprocity with Arizona. But
there may also be some insurance reasons for that as well.
That makes sense. But it's just a thing that you pass the very quick background check, and you buy a gun. Or you buy a gun off a coworker like I did. And you just either have it in your purse or you put it on a holster. And so people with no training, because when I bought my gun, I'd never touched a gun, or I'd just taken a safety course, but I could have bought the gun without ever having done the safety course. That's not a requirement. So it's very easy for someone who has no experience with a firearm to just go and buy one and then think they are Billy Badass and put it on a holster and try and stop a robbery, but shoot an old lady and her cat who are coming in for like cat food.
Yeah.
So when they did that episode, it was tragic to know that people that go and can pass concealed carry are just as poor marksmen and shouldn't be gun owners as people that Arizona gives guns to.
I know, when the Pulse shooting happened in Orlando, there were people saying, oh, well, they should have had concealed carry there, and you could have taken that guy out easy. I mean, how many people do you see with a SAG or Sig Sauer or whatever it was the guy had, firing? It's an easy target. It's like, dude, have you ever been in a club? And it's loud music, a lot of flashing lights, and
right, people running all over the place. I have a hard enough time not spilling my drink, let alone pull, aim, and accurately shoot a firearm.
Mm-hmm. And supposedly in Dallas at that Black Lives Matter march that lunatic shot at all the cops, there were a bunch of guys there who were open carrying, and they all turned and ran rather than, draw their gun and try to take him out. Not that they probably would have been able to, since the dude, had military training and knew how to fire from a concealed position. And, I mean, not that I've ever been in a city when somebody's firing off guns, but I've been in, they have the 4th of July celebration in downtown Nashville. You get all kinds of echoes from the fireworks off the buildings. I'm sure you get the same thing from gunfire. So you probably, depending on how that street was set up, if there were a lot of tall buildings, there were, you probably couldn't even tell where the shots were coming from.
And considering the situation, you'd be lucky to not have some cops empty a clip in you if you're aiming a gun, if you're standing behind them, aiming a gun in their general direction. As we know, LAPD was looking for that ex-cop and put 107 bullets in a similar looking pickup truck.
No, it wasn't that similar looking. It was the wrong color, the wrong make and model. And it wasn't a case of, well, it was, the guy was driving a Chevy pickup and these people were driving a GMC pickup, which is the same thing, just different plastic stuck on it. No, the guy was driving like a Toyota and they were driving a Chevy, and his was like red and theirs was blue. And they saw a pickup.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah, it was that bad. And cause I can remember when that whole thing unraveled, and it was like, everybody at first was saying, well, this guy's a psychopath, blah, blah, blah. And then it was like, well, he's wrong in what he's doing, but he might actually have a point, because they're just shooting anything.
Right. 107 bullets. And after someone did the math for me, that was a clip per cop. And apparently there were 8 cops.
Yeah.
So 8 cops just started firing into a vehicle, and they hit several houses in the area.
And they didn't kill anybody, thankfully, but they barely, like the one woman got shot in the shoulder who got hit. And it's like, you put all that round in the vehicle and you only winged somebody?
Right. That's another 107 bullets and nobody died. we're happy because it was the wrong person. But if that would have been the correct person, well, now he's still gotten away.
Yeah. Yeah. And I you know, we definitely have some systemic problems here that have to be addressed. And I don't know if it's going to happen, regardless of who gets to be president. You know, I mean, let's
we need Canada's prime minister.
Yeah. He certainly seems to have the right ideas.
I like him.
You just think he's sexy.
I do think he's kind of cute. And he was out there in his cowboy boots dancing. Yep.
Well, he was a model for a while.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
He was he was a model. He was a ski instructor, I think. He some kind of athletics he was involved in, and he was also an instructor in either that form of athletics or another kind. He's a real Renaissance man.
I like him. I don't know who's going to be our next president, but they're definitely not going to be jogging down the street like Trudeau and the president of Mexico were, looking all sexy.
Yeah. Okay, you want to take the next story before you get too hot and bothered?
Oh, I know. Yes, okay. This gentleman. Accused of sexual harassment, Roger Ailes is negotiating exit from Fox News.
Well, the negotiations are over because he's gone.
Yes. Roger Ailes' tenure as the head of Fox News appears to be over. Mr. Ailes and 20th Century Fox News' parent company, are in the advanced stages of discussion that would lead to his departure as chairman. So, because he is gone, basically what happened is a suit was filed on July 6th against him by a former anchor, Gretchen Carlson. The suit prompted 20th Century Fox to conduct an internal review, and it set off an intense round of speculation in the news and media and the television industry. Megyn Kelly is also involved, and a few other women have made accusations. And like with rape culture in general, everyone is very quick to shut Megyn Kelly down and say that she's lying and she's upset, and that he's actually helped her in her career and she should be thankful. And his lawyer, I mean, it's your lawyer is going to be on your side, has come out and said that Mr. Ailes has absolutely never, ever sexually harassed Megyn Kelly. And has spent most of the last decade making her as famous as she is. So there's that guy that I also now don't like.
Yeah, well, and at least 6 other women. I think the total of women who've come forward now is something around like 16 or 20 who've come out and said Roger Ailes sexually harassed me, or, you know, I had to provide sexual favors to Ailes in return for keeping my job.
Right.
You know, and honestly, not that I'm gay, but there's no way I could fuck somebody like him. I mean, he looks like Jabba the Hutt.
Yeah. And it's always these, I mean, again, you don't ever want to be sexually harassed by anyone. But who was the gentleman that also used to do Wheel of Fortune? He apparently was an infamous...
Pat Sajak?
It's a guy that was on there. Drew Carey replaced him.
Oh, you mean not Wheel of Fortune, you mean The Price is Right, Bob Barker.
Yes, there we go. Apparently Bob Barker has been known to harass those ladies, and one woman said that she was forced daily to provide oral to him before the show started. And I just think, what are these gentlemen? You're rich and you can't go find a nice girlfriend to follow around? Why are we...
Well...
I just don't get it.
I mean, part of it's a power thing that, you know, they want to be able to, you know, exert influence over somebody else.
Right.
But I'm not, you know, I'm not really surprised that Ailes has gotten, you know, has been outed as sexually harassing women. There's a huge problem in the entertainment industry, Bill Cosby, where they cover up people sexually, abusing people.
Oh yeah.
And whenever you have a situation where there's a dramatic power imbalance, that's going to develop regardless of who's involved. I mean, you don't hear about it, but I'm sure that there's probably female executives who, sexually harass, the hot young stud that comes onto the set or, is trying to get a job in this or that film just because it's,
oh God,
it's a power thing. Oh God, what?
I was just, for some reason, I thought of, I just saw Ghostbusters, and it's a fictional film, but for some reason I was like, oh God, they sexually harassed that poor boy while he's working in the office. It's a movie, America. I'm sorry, I'm not sure why
No, it's, I understand there's a number of things that I saw when I was a kid. Did you ever see a TV show called Barney Miller?
No.
Okay. Have you ever seen Night Court?
Yes.
Okay. The guy who created Night Court, before he created Night Court, he did a show called Barney Miller, which was about a New York police detective. And, the show generally took place in the offices of, of the detective unit at the precinct. And the show was hugely progressive for its time. I mean, they had gay characters. They had minority characters in prominent roles. I mean, like in the first season, they had a Latino actor as one of the detectives, and he was a main character. They had Ron Glass as was another main character. They had they had, they were supportive of women's issues and things like that. But you watch it now, and it, unless you were alive at that time, you don't understand how progressive the show was because, I mean, they had gay characters on there, and they were stereotypes. But it was the first time that you had a gay character in a recurring role, and even though they were portrayed as a stereotype, the characters on the show were still sympathetic to that individual without, even though they did mocking, which was hugely progressive. And so, your comment about that reminded me of that because certain things that, it seems okay now, and it's actually forward thinking now, but, in a couple of decades, we may look at it and say, that wasn't the right thing to do. Yeah, I can't comment on the new Ghostbusters film. I haven't seen it. I've heard all the various reviews of it, and I don't understand the hostility towards it.
I just thought it was a fun movie, and I'm a bad Ghostbusters fan because I actually thought the older ones were kind of bad movies, even though I love 80s bad movies, and I'm just not actually a fan of the originals. So,
well, the second one was pretty bad.
Okay, thank you for understanding.
Yeah, I mean the first one was a light, frothy souffle. It was a fun little movie. It shouldn't be, don't take it too seriously, even though Dan Aykroyd believes all that stuff.
Does he really?
Yeah. He was on Neil deGrasse Tyson's Star Talk a couple of years ago, and that subject came up, and he apparently his parents were, or his grandparents, I think it was his grandparents, were psychics. I mean, and they were like the best known psychics in Canada. They were actual celebrities. They were always on the radio or always on talk shows in Canada. And I guess they made serious money doing that. And so he deeply buys into all that stuff. But he said, I will give him some credit. He does say that there's, that there should be a serious scientific investigation into this stuff, and he doesn't think it has been done yet. So he's apparently looking for the answers, even though he doesn't realize that, yeah, we've done that and it's all bullshit.
Wow. So I now I kind of want to write a story series about scientists that investigate ghosts, although that's Ghostbusters. Anyway, but I do like that he's at least acknowledging there needs to be some sort of scientific investigation to the paranormal and the psychic. I can't believe that he actually believes that.
Yeah, I
That's
was surprised because it was the interview was over 2 or 3 parts, and it wasn't in the first interview. It was like in the second or the third episode where that came out. And I had heard that he was a bit off. He's an electronics nerd. I mean, he's got not only does he have all kinds of computer equipment, but he's got all kinds of weird electronics. Old radio sets that had this one weird feature that nobody else put in them, and the technology isn't used today because it really wasn't that good. He's that level of obsessive, and he's been like that for decades. And I'd known about that, but then when I heard the interview and he starts talking about believing in the paranormal, I was like, wow, he is definitely out there. And he is not.
Wow,
he is.
I have no idea.
He is not comfortable speaking without a script.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know if you ever saw there's a famous Saturday Night Live skit from when he was on where it's called the Bass-O-Matic, and it's this blender you put bass in, and it turns them into a milkshake, and then people drink it.
That sounds horrid.
Yeah, it's horrid. He's got this weird stilted speaking pattern in that sketch. And
he doesn't have a script. Wow.
And in the thing he did with the interview he had with Neil deGrasse Tyson, he had that same stilted speaking pattern, and he would kind of fade in and out of it on certain things. And Tyson asked him about the vodka that he sells, because he does that crystal.
Oh, the Crystal Head.
Yeah, and when he was regurgitating the ad copy about the vodka, he sounded more confident, and his speech pattern flowed, seemingly more naturally. But when he was just talking, it was weird, this weird, odd, stilted nature to it.
Interesting. I feel like I did see that or hear that episode because I've had the vodka and it's absolute shit. And I've had some bad vodka.
When they put it in a fancy, a funky bottle like that, usually it's not very good. Whatever it is.
Right.
Because if it was good vodka, they wouldn't need to put it in a funky bottle. I think they filter it through sapphires or some kind of precious jewels, and that's supposed to imbue it with something.
Oh, good Lord. Now I have to read about this. Yeah. I drink vodka water, because I want to drink and I'm trying not to have more calories than necessary. And I've had better rot gut well vodka than that stuff.
Well, give you a little secret. They did this on Mythbusters. They found a way to improve your vodka. If you've got a crappy vodka, get a one of those water filtration pitchers and pour it in there a couple of times and allow that to filter it, and that improves it. They did. It was one of the, I don't remember which season it was. I just remember because Carrie, the gorgeous redhead,
right?
She was on that one, and she was the one who, she could reliably pick out which was the good vodkas and which was the bad ones in a blind test when they started. And they ran this really rot gut vodka through various levels of charcoal filtration. They like did it one time and then, and then another one they did 2 times and stuff like that. And it was only when they got to like running it through a charcoal filter about 10 times that they stopped being able to tell that it was the cheap stuff.
Wow. And now I want to do some more research about vodka because I don't understand how filtering makes that taste go away.
Well, it's, I don't really know a lot about vodka. I know that they, like whiskey and bourbon are aged in barrels that are charred on the inside, and that's actually charcoal filtration, even though you wouldn't think of it as that.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know if they do the same thing with vodka or not. I just find it weird that you can make vodka from, different things, because I always thought vodka was made only from potatoes, but no, it turns out that you can make it from other things as well.
Yeah, the one that Puff Daddy or P. Diddy or Sean Combs or whatever he wants to be called, his is from grapes. So that was very interesting for me to learn.
Is it any good?
Yeah, I like it.
I'm always surprised when a celebrity does something like an alcohol or whatever product and it's actually good. Because I figure most of them are just like, yeah, I'll slap my name on it and I'll love it. Doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah, that's kind of why I try to avoid celebrity brands of anything.
Okay, well, one last story.
Yes.
And I believe that one's mine. So,
yes.
From the NewYorkTimes.com, a federal appeals court on Wednesday ruled that Texas voter identification law, one of the strictest in the country, violated the Voting Rights Act, and that the state must find ways to accommodate voters who face hardships in obtaining the necessary documents. This, I'm a little surprised at, not so much the judge's ruling, but the fact that they could even bring this to begin with, because I thought a lot of the Voting Rights Act provisions had been tossed out by the Supreme Court prior to this, which it's going to wind up at the Supreme Court again, because I'm sure Texas is going to appeal all this shit.
Oh, of course they will.
Because, you can make it as easy as possible to get a gun, but you can't make it easy for people to vote.
Because we never do bad things with guns, but too many minorities might vote Democrat and then we're fucked.
It's, both of them are rights guaranteed under the Constitution, so why don't they get equal protection?
I have no idea. It's got to be the fear-mongering of voter fraud. And the reason that, guns, again, this fear-mongering of they're coming to take your guns. 7 years of Obama's presidency, and they're coming to take your guns. Nobody cares about the voting rights that are leaving this country. Alabama they closed a bunch of driver license offices.
They closed all but like 3.
Right. And when they were initially doing the first several waves of them, they picked cities and counties that had large percentages. The majority were minority voters, specifically black voters. So when they brought this out, black voters lost the places where they could go get a driver's license or an ID first. And then eventually they had to close all but 3 out of, it was like 50 or 60. It was an insane amount of offices that closed.
Yeah.
And I just was kind of amazed that while closing these offices, they're now enacting really, really rigid laws to get for people to be able to vote, which is total bullshit.
Yeah. Forgot to mention this. I'm going with luck. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to have Zandy Anderson on.
Ooh, cool.
And that's probably one of the things we're going to talk about. Mainly, I want her on to spew about Mike Pence, Trump's vice presidential nominee, because he's rabidly anti-abortion, and Zandy knows a few things about reproductive rights. So,
oh, definitely.
I would rather have her go off on it than me say something, because while I agree that Pence is horrific, I don't have quite the level of understanding that she does, because she lives and breathes it and deals with it every day, basically.
Yes, I follow her on Facebook, and I love that she is. I mean, it's what she does, and I wish I could be in the same position. But I love following her on Facebook. It's so amazing to watch.
Yeah, she does. She does a lot of good work, and almost all of it is unpaid. So that's all the more remarkable.
It is.
That's it for this episode of The Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, as well as just about anywhere else podcasts can be found. Many of the episodes are also on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter. @TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle. It's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can support it via Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fosnuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.